Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the biofuels and I will mainly focus on production technology of bioethanol. Throughout the video I will give you background information about biofuels and then you will get acquainted with types of biofuels. Then I will talk about liquid biofuels, their source of raw materials. As I said, here we will mainly focus on ethanol production, its application, and some limitations. Okay, so let's get started. Let's ask what is biofuel? It is any fuel that's derived from biomass. It can be plant, algae, or animal waste. A biofuel is considered to be a source of renewable energy, but fossil fuels are such as petroleum, coal, and natural gas. Biofuel is commonly advocated as a cost-effective and eco-friendly alternative to petroleum and other fossil fuels, particularly within the context of concern over the contribution made by fossil fuels to global warming. We can't make energy and we can do what we can if it's fossil fuel, and we can pull that out of the ground. And then we can burn it and we can convert that chemical energy into mechanical energy to drive a car or fly a plane. Alright, but those energies already exist. Where does our energy come from? As you probably know, most of it comes from fossil fuels and about 85% of it. The rest 15% can be divided into renewable energy sources. We do get a fair amount from combustibles, and I mean wood. We get some of them from hydroelectric and a fair amount from nuclear. But the main difference of biofuels from the other renewables is that others are used only as electricity, such as solar, wind, and etc. First of all, when we talk about biofuels, what we mean molecules that comes from recently living organisms. Why recently? Because you can say petroleum and coals are in fact organic materials that have been acted on the geological force over many years, over geological times. But originally they were plants and algae whose biomass was transformed, and so when we talk about biofuels, we are talking about biological materials that recently came from living organisms. And biofuels have been used by humans for millennia. Burning wood, burning dry dung, they have been common fuels for a long time. In more modern terms, we can say biofuels. We are talking about bioalcohols, biodiesel, biochar, which is the refuse from agriculture which can be burned to generate energy, and biogas, which here is shown be collected directly as methane from the coal. Yeah, we are doing it actually. And then when we are talking about biofuels, we have first generation liquid biofuels, which have been around for a number of years, and these are largely ethanol and biodiesel. And both of these cases we are taking plant material. Either taking plant material that's very rich in sugar, like corn, sugarcane, various kinds of starchy crops, and then using that sugar to feed microorganisms that will ferment into ethanol. In the case of biodiesel, plant oil, either oils have already been used as cooking oil and are being reused or taken directly from various oil-rich seed crops. So they release these fatty acid methyl esters that are then useful as biodiesel. Okay, generation of biofuels are derived into 3, sometimes 4, where the fourth is synthetic generations. The first generation biofuel are made from sugar, starch, vegetable oil, or animal fats using conventional technology. The basic feedstock from the production of the first generation biofuels are often seed or grain such as wheat, which yields the starch that's fermented into bioethanol, or sunflower seed, which are pressed to yield vegetable that can be used in biodiesel. Second generation biofuels production processes can use a variety of non-food crops. This includes vast biomass, the stalk of wheat, corn, wood, or biomass crops. Second generation or 2G biofuels use biomass to liquid technology, including cellulosic biofuels from non-food crops. Many second generation biofuels are under development, such as biohydrogen, biomethanol, Fischer-Tropsch diesel, biohydrogen diesel, mixed alcohols, and wood diesel, and etc. The third generation feedstocks are crops which require further research and development to become commercially feasible, such as perennial grasses, fast-growing trees, and algae. They are designed exclusively for fuels production and are more commonly referred to as energy crops. Catalysts and nitrolyzed catalysts may be base, acid, or enzyme material. Catalysts are required in biodiesel production to initiate the esterification reaction and promote an increase in the solubility to allow the reaction to proceed at a reasonable rate. And in this report, I will stay on bioethanol, which is the most widely used and economically important. Ethanol is the most popular alcoholic biofuel available in the current world market. Henry Ford has used the term fuel of the future for the ethanol. There are several reasons for being it use an alternative fuel, such as it's produced from the renewable agricultural product like corn, sugar, molasses, including other products rather than non-renewable petroleum products. It is less toxic than other alcoholic fuels, and byproducts incomplete oxidation of ethanol, the byproducts like acetic acid and acetaldehyde. In the ethanol, they are less toxic than the byproducts formed from the other alcohols. The feedstock used for fuel ethanol production is mainly sugarcane in tropical areas such as India, Brazil, Colombia, while it is dominantly corn in other areas such as United States, European Union, and China. Ethanol production from sugar crops such as sugarcane and sugar beet account for 40% of total bioethanol produced and nearly 60% corresponding to starch crops. Due to increasing demand for ethanol in the last few years and due to shortage of molasses and corn, the price of ethanol is increasing day by day. Also due to increase in demand as a food source and its rising price, the availability and feasibility using corns as a feedstock instead. The predominant technology for converting biomass to ethanol is fermentation, followed by distillation. Fermentation is a biochemical conversion process in which biomass is decomposed using microorganisms, for example, bacteria or enzymes. This technology can be used for various types of biomass feedstock. Once the biomass reaches the ethanol plant, it's stored in a warehouse where it's conditioned to prevent early fermentations and bacterial contamination. Through the pretreatment, carbohydrates are extracted or made more accessible for the extraction. During this step, the amount of available sugars depends on biomass and pretreatment used. A large portion of fibers may remain for conversion into simple sugar through hydrolysis reaction or other techniques. The hydrolyzed increase in demand as food source and its rising price. The hydrolyzed yeast, nutrients, and other ingredients are added to the fermentation at the beginning of the batch operation. In the fed batch process, one or more inputs are added as fermentation progresses. Continuous processes in which ingredients are constantly input and product removed from the fermentation vessels are also used. In efficient processes, the cell densities may be made high by recycling or immobilizing the yeast in order to improve their activity and increase the fermentation productivity. Yeah? The fermentation reaction also occurs at a temperature between 25 degrees Celsius and 30 degrees Celsius and lasts between 6 hours and 72 hours, depending on the composition of the hydrolysate and cell density and psychological activity and yeast species. The remaining flow from the distillation column, known as witness or stillage, can be volatilized to produce co-products, which may include a process, steam, and electricity, products for feeding animals, stillage of moderate concentration used as fertilizer, and other valuable byproducts. Here we can talk about two technologies for production. There are currently no clear commercial or technical advantage between the chemical, biochemical, and thermochemical pathways. Both sets of technologies remain unproven at the fully commercial scale and under continual development and evaluation, and have significant technical and environmental barriers yet to be overcome. One key difference between the biochemical and thermochemical routes is that lignin components is the residue of the enzymatic hydrolysis processes and hence can be used for heat and power generation. The thermochemical processes is converted into synthesis gas along with the cellulose and hemicellulose biomass components. A second major difference is that biochemical routes produce ethanol, whereas the thermochemical routes can also be used to produce a range of longer chain hydrocarbons from the synthesis gas. These include biofuels better suited for aviation and marine purposes. Okay, as I already said, ethanol from sugar and starch feedstock is commonly referred as first-generation biofuel, and ethanol from sugar biomass is known as second-generation ethanol. In 2019, about 95% of total ethanol is produced from cornstarch in the United States. That's why I decided to talk about biochemical production from corn in this video. The first step in this conversion process comprises milling or grinding of grain so as to release its starch. Then the material is diluted in water to adjust amount of sugar in the mash. This is necessary to maintain the yeast and make the mash easier to stir and handle. Then mixture is cooked to dissolve all water-soluble starch. The starch is converted to sugar simultaneously. This can be done by enzymes or acid hydrolysis. In the case of hydrolysis, dilute mineral acid is added to the grain slurry prior to cooking. The short carbohydrates resulting from these processing steps can be fermented by microorganisms. The short carbohydrates resulting from these processing steps can be fermented by microorganisms. For growing of the yeast needed for the fermentation process, the solution must be slightly acid, namely a pH between 9.8 and 5. During fermentation, ethanol is produced, which is diluted with water. This process also results in the formation of carbon dioxide. Through a series of distillation and dehydration steps, the ethanol concentration can be increased. The conversion process of lignocellulosic biomass to ethanol only different from the process described with respect to breakdown or hydrolysis of the raw material to fermentation, fermentable sugar. This hydrolysis process is more difficult than by hydrolysis of starch. Lignocellulosic biomass contains carbohydrates polymers called cellulose and hemicellulose that can be converted to sugar. Cellulose is composed of glucose molecules bonded together in long chains that form crystalline structures. Hemicellulose consists of mixture of polymers made up from xylosine, mannose, galactose, or aramnose. It is much stable than cellulose. Both materials are not soluble in water. The remaining fraction, a complex aromatic polymer called lignin. It cannot be fermented because it is resistant to biological degradation. It is resistant. This material can be utilized for the production of electricity or heat. For fuel applications, the purity of ethanol must be almost 100%. This means that the water content must be much lower compared to ethanol produced by current industrial technology. For the dehydration of ethanol, several technologies are available, such as use of molecular sieves, membrane separations, which can still be improved. The power and heat production from the non-fermentable fraction of biomass and overall process integration can also be developed further, which will lead to an increase in energetic efficiency and economic performance of the process. The power and heat production from the non-fermentable fraction of biomass and the overall processes integration can also be developed further. For business, though, the primary concern is the switch to ethanol is correct storage. Because ethanol attracts water, tanks become corroded through the exposure to water and the usual rusting processes. However, a second problem occurs because ethanol provides an excellent food for microbes, and when they consume the fuel, they produce acetic acid and that vaporized and corrodes parts both above and below the fuel line. Experience shows that here the corrosion above the fuel line in tank storing ethanol blends, there is likely be even worse damage, potentially posing serious environmental and safety risks, and as well as to the bottom line through fuel loss. Actually pure ethanol has a flash point of 13 degrees Celsius. It releases vapor into the atmosphere, creating a flammable environment. Temperature-controlled chemical storage buildings will prevent excess evaporations. And when we talk about maintaining fuel integrity, we can say that anyone storing significant amount of biofuel will be affected by phase separation, as well as ensuring your tank and fittings are appropriate for keeping your fuel fresh and avoiding reactions. A fuel treatment is a good option. And when we talk about watching for water damage part, following on from that, the check tanks regularly for water at least once a month should be done. If we want to protect our storage tank, it is essential to check fuel storage tank regularly for the telltale signs of the corrosion resulting either from high water content or the presence of the microbes producing acid vapors. We can also treat our tank with an anti-corrosion treatment for boundary protection. We should try to avoid using the same tank for different types of fuel because it increases the chance for cross-contamination from different microvarieties. I think it's enough for storage part. Let's talk about a little bit application of ethanol. You probably know that the ethanol can be used as a transport fuel to replace gasoline, as a fuel for power generation by thermal combustion, and as a fuel for cells by thermochemical reaction. And ethanol is best used in spark ignition engines because of its high octane rating. Due to its poor ignition quality, low cetane number, it is less suitable for diesel engines. It is generally impractical to use neat ethanol in spark ignition engines due to its low vapor pressure and high latent heat of vaporization, which make cold start problematic. The most cost-effective aid is blending of ethanol with small proportion of volatile fuels such as gasoline. Those various mixture of bioethanol with gasoline or diesel fuels have been used. The most well-known blends are here. I would like to show this, especially in 95D. It's the most famous one. Okay, and after that I would like to talk about a little bit limitations part. Some of disadvantages of biofuels apply many of low diverse. Some of the disadvantages of biofuels apply mainly to low diverse biofuel sources such as corn, soybeans, sugarcane, oil palms, which are traditional agriculture crops. Both of these kinds of fuels, ethanol or biodiesel, we know how to make that technology is available, but there are problems associated with them. And one of the big problems is that our food crop. So first of all, if we are going to use this material to make these fuels, that means that the lands that they are growing on is not going to be used for food. No, the water also being used to water these crops, it's not going to be used for food. So we are taking land, we are taking water out of the food supply. And beyond that, another problem is with ethanol in particular, there is another limitation that ethanol is not a fuel that can go right into our engine. The engines that we have, that we use for our cars, or other engines that we have been using, either diesel or gasoline. It is really straightforward. Ethanol has been made commercially, industrially for a long time. But anyway, I believe that it will be. And we can continue to celebrate August 10 as a World's Biofuel Day. Goodbye.